I visited my doctor, and he said that, asked what I did, and I said I meditated, played tennis, and read books. And he asked what book, and I said Thoreau. And I asked who was Thoreau, and I said he's like an environmentalist. And then he said that if global warming gets too far, it could reach a point of no return. So to prevent that, we're going to continue reading Thoreau.
How old is your doctor?
He's a young guy, doctor. He's worried. Channing fretted, so he was fretting about the environment. So, Channing fretted the most. Page 478.
You can only sing at 7 in the morning.
What?
You're the only one who can sing at 7 in the morning. Usually people sing at 10 at night.
Sing. Sing?
You sing.
Sing. Well, a lot of people sing. A lot of monks sing in the morning, don't they? Why can't you sing in the morning? This is not my morning. My morning is at 3 o'clock in the morning. This is the afternoon of a mystic. The day actually ends at 9 a.m. for a mystic. The rest of the day is like a waste of time, and the only time that of any value is in mystical experience from 3 a.m. to 9 a.m. So the rest is a big fat waste of time. Channing fretted the most, posting worried letters, alerting Mary.
The time I have with you is your waste of time.
No, it's not a waste of time.
That's the time you give me?
No, the time is not wasted. No, I like the time, but in a balanced life, right? You have the hardcore advanced stuff, and then you have a balancing of life. In life you have the spiritual life, the intellectual life, and the emotional life, and the sex life. No sex. No sex life. Well, when you're a mystic, you have no sex life, right? Mary Russell Watson, that dear friend, was coughing heavily and losing weight. We're worried about Fred Thoreau's health. This is about Thoreau's health. We are nearing the end. By late February, he was escorting Thoreau outside for a stroll or two in town. Was that a blackbird? Thrilled Thoreau one mild afternoon, and on March 1st, Blake and Brown walked all the way from Worcester, in Ohio. It's Worcester. Worcester on a pilgrimage to see him. Alcott thought walking all the way in the slush was a bit extreme, but still their gesture impressed him. Quote, I know of nothing more creditable to Thoreau than this thoughtful regard and constancy shown to him by, quote, some of the best persons of his time. See, he's impressed if you walk to see him in the slush. When the school exhibition came on March 14th, Thoreau was too ill to attend, but he wrote Ricketson proudly that Alcott was now, quote, perhaps the most successful man in the town. Alcott is? Aglow in the universal praise for his work in their schools. As for himself, he insisted to everyone that while the house kept him prisoner still, he was happy, working hard, and hopeful ever, hopeful that spring's mild air would bring an end to his cough. What spring brought was civil war. Wow. Civil War started in 1860. I don't know how your American history is. Thoreau kept up with politics. In March, he fulminated to Thatcher against the cowardice of Lincoln's presidency, just a month old for being no government at all. See, some of them think that Abraham Lincoln isn't aggressive enough, that remember, he's actually slow at, in a way, at eliminating slavery. It's not eliminated for quite a while. So he's in the, it had not punished one Southerner for treason, stealing from the public treasury or murdering on political accounts, and the North must know there can be no union between freedmen and slaveholders, and vote and act accordingly. The purgatory ended 2 weeks later, on April 12, 1861, when South Carolina fired on the federal garrison at Fort Sumner in Charleston Harbor. It had been coming for months. Lincoln's election galvanized the South, and South Carolina succeeded just before Christmas. So now, let's see. You'd think he would have been elected in 1860. Wait a minute. Or is it 62? Don't know. I have no experience in history. 6 more southern states followed, and on Monday, February 4th, 1861, the 7 succeeders formed the Confederate States of America, electing Jefferson Davis their president. So now they succeeded. Lincoln in his inaugural address called their actions void. Since he did not recognize the rebellion, he would fire no shots. Hence Thoreau's fury. All this and still no action. They wanted him to act. I thought he did act, but what would he do? But why does Thoreau want him to act?
Thoreau's what, activist?
Activist. But the attack on Fort Sumner changed everything, crystallizing years of seething anger. It seems the South attacked, but they want their Sumner. When Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers to retake the fort, Concord ignited. Everyone is boiling over with excitement, wrote Lisa May Alcott. Young men and boys drill with all their might. Women and girls sew uniforms. Old folks, quote, settle the fate of the nation in grooves of newspapers, and the children make the streets hideous with distracted drums and fifes. I still think that war is no good. You think I'm more pacifist than them? Can't they just mind their own business? But on April 19th, as Concord's 40-man militia marched to war, Thoreau's journal recorded only the specimens and observations brought him by friends, mostly young Horace Mann, Mary's oldest boy, who had lately become Thoreau's eyes and ears and hands. Who's Mary? Is it an Alcott? As for war, Thoreau could not bear to acknowledge it. Quote, what anyone can want to read your Battle of the Pismirs, for at a time like this is past finding out, sputtered a furious Parker Pillsbury, who had begun his letter by calmly asking for a copy of Walden for a friend. But good Lord, quote, who wants to read how you can play with a bream in the water when the leviathan of slavery is hourly threatening to swallow old Abe like Jonah? In one thrust, Thoreau's life's work was swept into the dust. Worthless, pointless. Do you think that with the middle of a war, there's no point in reading Thoreau, Walden? But it's worthless, pointless dust. Well, it's not worthless, pointless dust to us.
During the war, it was minor. They had such, they had lives to care.
They have concerns during the war.
Much more important.
More important.
Important, but for an emergencies in a way.
Yeah. Well, they did have emergencies. So there's more to life than just meditation.
There is a war, unless you like to still see the
If something happens after 9 a.m., after meditation.
Sweetie, you have the heat here and you have the window open. Get up and close the window, please.
Get up?
Yeah, and close the window. I can't close it.
Okay.
And just close the window. You don't keep it open, okay?
Oh. You're worrying about things that are important besides meditation, like war. Rose Walden had become worthless dust, pointless and worthless dust. It was from his imprisonment he nevertheless held firm. Quote, I hope that he ignores Fort Sumter and Old Abe and all that, for that is just the most fatal, and indeed the only fatal, weapon you can direct against evil ever. Ignore? What business had an angel of light to be pondering the deeds of darkness? Why don't they just let Fort Sumner go? You didn't need Fort Sumner. Quote, I do not so much regret the present condition of things in this country, provided I regret it at all, as I do that I ever heard of it. Unquote. Lincoln had miscalculated. Southern secession was not a local rebellion to be put down in a mere police action, but the terrible truth and cataclysmic cause that unfolded over the coming months and years shaped the course of events that Thoreau would not witness. It seems Emily Dickinson witnessed the Civil War. In the midst of spring's war fever, Dr. Bartlett told him his lungs might not heal in time for another New England winter. He must, quote, clear out somewhere helpful, perhaps the West Indies. Thoreau had to go somewhere else. Too muggy, thought Thoreau. He settled instead on Minnesota. Wow. Today it seems an odd choice, but then the upper Midwest was touted as a uniquely helpful climate for consumptives. Word. For Thoreau there were other, still more telling reasons. He had always wanted to see the West. West I must go, on all counts he had pleaded with John in his youth. The West has many attractions for me, particularly the lake country and the Indians. He could go see Custer's Last Stand. He could have gone to the Grand Tetons. He had told Calvin Green, tempted by his invitation to Michigan. Margaret Fuller had gone west to restart her career, and her book on that trip provided the model for a week. Emerson toured the West regularly, and with many contextos. Thoreau would never be far from friends. He also had family out there. Samuel Thatcher Jr., George Thatcher's brother, had moved from Maine to St. Anthony, Minnesota, where his own lung disease had cleared up. He'd lived there happily ever since. The Thatchers could provide a home base in local context. Minnesota would be. Do you think you should move to Minnesota? For your cold? But with whom? Allergies. I don't know if you should go up into the deep north or for allergies, or go up into Canada to Alaska. You could go to Iceland.
Yeah, to dine.
You could go to Iceland, Antarctica, or Tierra Fuego. But with whom? Channing was Thoreau's first choice. His first choice is Channing. He really liked this Channing guy. But Channing waffled. Do you know what it is to waffle? Do you waffle much? If I ask you to do something, do you waffle?
Waffles, I like waffles.
You like waffles?
Belgian waffles.
But I'm asking if you like Belgian waffles? But are you a Belgian waffler?
No.
So he turned to Blake, the kind, wise, and ever devoted disciple who would have to go slow and take it easy. He warned he'd need perhaps 3 months and would come back by a different route, say through Mackinac or in Montreal. His romance with Canada pulled him still. Quote, I have no right to offer myself as a companion to anybody. Quote, he apologized in his invalid condition, but perhaps Blake could make a part of this journey with him. Blake, though, had to say no. But the 17-year-old Horace Mann, Thoreau's attentive young friend, and he said yes.
Yes, old man. The boy.
Yeah, young.
Just they grew up that little.
Didn't say man. It said, but the 17-year-old Horace Mann is his name. Junior, Thoreau's attentive young friend, said yes. Horace had grown up in Ohio. So Ohio comes to the rescue of Thoreau. He takes somebody from Ohio, where his famous father founded and was the first president of Antioch, and he had visited Michigan, so he knew something of the West already. Best of all, he wanted to enroll at Harvard's Law or in scientific school, study with the Gisick and Gray.
Michigan is west.
What?
Michigan is not west.
Michigan is west of him.
Oh.
West of us.
Oh, right.
Of course, Michigan.
That's not west United States.
It's Midwest. To them, it's west. Okay? Ohio is west to someone from New England at this time. Became a natural scientist. Thoreau, see, this is his young friend, Horace Mann. He sounds famous somehow. Thoreau, with his many Harvard connections, would make a perfect tutor, and the boy had a pesky cough too. Minnesota might be just what he needed. Young Horace was shy, amicable, easy to please, and naively unabashed by the responsibility. As for his mother, a teacher herself, sister to Sophia Hawthorne, a teacher herself, sister. His mother is the sister to Sophia Hawthorne and to Elizabeth Peabody, who had published The Dial and Civil Disobedience. Well, of course, she said yes. Henry Thoreau was practically a member of the family. See, he's practically a member of the Hawthorne family. Have you read Nathaniel Hawthorne? We are not. We are not steeped in the classics at all. We haven't read the entire canon, Western canon. We read the Western canon, or just a few pieces of it. It is all a mistake, protested Emerson. Thoreau should stay home, buy Mr. Monot's piece instead. That's what he told Ellen when she came back from bringing Thoreau a map the day before they were set to leave. Ellen invited Henry over to dinner, where the two old friends divided their discussion between natural history and politics, and Emerson did not persuade Thoreau to call it off. Next morning, Emerson sent a farewell note and a list of names of good men that an invalid traveler can call on for aid and comfort. And with that, on Saturday afternoon, May 11th, 1861, Henry Thoreau and Horace Mann boarded the train, gaining speed as they passed Damon's Mills in West Concord, busy cranking out blue Union uniforms. They stayed 2 nights in Woodchester, where Harry Blake took them riding to Quinsigamond Pond. It would be Thoreau's last visit. From there they took the Great Western Railroad to Niagara Falls, passing Pittsfield. Thoreau might have craned his head to see Mount Greylock on the horizon. In Albany they overnighted at the Delavon Hotel, said to be the best in town. Not so good as costly, grumbled Thoreau, worried about finances. Horace assured his mother that Thoreau, quote, has got along very well, only he is pretty tired. They would rest in Niagara Falls, where they put up for the night at a tourist stop before seeking a boarding house next morning, only to find them all full. They had arrived on May 15th, the opening day of tourist season. Well, at least he's going in the summer to Minnesota. Finally, the American House took them in for $1 a day. That's what it cost, $1 a day. And Horace sat down dutifully and again wrote home. Thoreau is better already. He can hear the falls even as he writes. He's listening to the Niagara Falls. You'd think he would get better by inspiration alone. Can you get better just by positive thinking?
I don't know how he secretly going to the falls.
He's supposed to rest. Who knows if
he didn't do that right, he got sick.
Maybe traveling is no good. He should have listened to Emerson. Do you think Emerson was the wisest of all his friends? Thoreau, too, was riding home. The world-famous falls sounded like, quote, a train coming or a locomotive letting off steam, unquote. A sound so familiar he'd hardly noticed it. It was, he jotted in his notes, the, quote, most imposing sight as yet, unquote, like the sea off Cape Cod. They botanized around Goat Island, where Thoreau collected his first species of the trip, trucking them into his plant press and listing them by the dozen. When they crossed over to Canada for the best view of the falls, they, like everyone else, fell victim to a tourist scam that cost a painful $5. Wow, $5. That's 5 nights in a hotel. He poked around all the little wild spaces he could find. It was cold and wet, and Thoreau felt it. He brought some troches, or throat lozenges, to help with his cough. From Niagara, they headed to Chicago on Monday, May 20th, taking the train through Lower Ontario, or Canada West, the very country Thoreau had always meant to explore. He liked what he saw at the window, agreeably diversified and like Ontario to the north. Quite sea-like, but there would be no exploration. He's not passing through Ohio, he's going through Canada. Ohio didn't save him. Maybe if he had gone to Ohio. No. And the Lake Ontario to the north, quite sea-like, but there would be no exploration out on Windsor. He ferried across the river to Detroit. Now he's in Detroit. Thoreau's correspondent Calvin Green lived just a few miles north, but a social call was beyond his strength. Instead, he let the train carry him through Michigan hardwood forest, bearing west to Lake Michigan, then down through the high sand dunes, along the Indiana shoreline into Illinois, reaching Chicago by supper time. Now he's in Chicago. They splurged for 2 nights at the celebrated Metropolitan Hotel. How much you think they spent? $1.50 a night. For next day, they had urgent business. Horace must convert their Massachusetts bank draft to gold coin. But Chicago in financial chaos, the city banks were backed with Southern securities, which now in wartime were all failing. Wow, that's interesting. Mann worked his connections, finding a family friend who exchanged their Massachusetts bank draft for a check for $100, which in a small miracle, Thoreau's devoted correspondent, Benjamin Wiley, now a banker, converted to $100 of scarce gold coin. See, there's all the banking system was separated there in different states, and it's not, there was not the currency we have. Thoreau had his own round of visits to perform, first to the comfortable sofa of the Reverend Robert Collier, a fiery abolitionist and Unitarian minister who talked of the war and the West and literature, and who long remembered the musicality of Thoreau's low voice and the way he hesitated for the right word or paused with a pathetic patience to master the trouble in his chest, continuing with words, quote, as distinct and true to the ear as those of a great singer, unquote, in sentences perfect and entire. Do you think he thinks before he talks? That evening, Kohler wrote Thoreau a note. We hope you write your great book about the West, the one, quote, that will be to us what your other books are, unquote, a wish with special poignancy for all Thoreau's Western fans. That afternoon, Horace and Henry toured the town with a family friend, William Holt Clark, brother to the transcendentalist James Friedman Clark, an engineer helping lay out Chicago's 223 miles of sewer lines in a man after Thoreau's own heart. Quote, sewers or main drains fall but 2 feet in a mile, quote, noted the surveyor who had spent a summer calculating the fall of the Concord River. Next morning, Horace made a dash to the post office to mail his update. All was well. Thoreau was, quote, getting along very well, quote, except for, quote, a little trouble with his bowels, unquote, due to the lime in the drinking water. Their next mail stop would be St. Anthony, Minnesota. It would take another 3 days. They spent a long day riding across the Illinois prairie, passing near the 160-acre home of L.R.A. Channing had tried to farm in 1839. From the speeding car, Thoreau, frustrated, craned his neck to see a pink blooming tree. It was the wild crabapple. There was no way to tell. At the Mississippi River and East Dubuque, the line ended, and from there they traveled by riverboat. Next morning they were chugging up the Mississippi aboard the Itasca, reaching Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin, that afternoon, passing Red Wing, Minnesota, the next evening, and docking at St. Paul. Early Sunday morning, May 26th. Years before, Thoreau had seen a moving panorama of the Mississippi scrolling past and celebrated as a picture of the golden age of America. Real life on the Mississippi seemed less heroic. Immense stacks of wheat straw overshadowed wheat fields, houses, and people like mice nesting in a wheat stack, which is their wealth. The river journey fascinated him. Each little one-street village was a drama in itself. The stately approach of the steamboat, the whistles and bells, the postmaster running down with his bag, the passengers hustling off and on, the dogs and pigs rushing to the commotion, the great silent bluffs beyond. After breakfasting in St. Paul, they rode 9 miles by stage through a rainstorm to St. Anthony. After 2 long weeks, they had arrived, now for a warm welcome by the Thatchers and a long healing rest. Instead, they found the Thatcher household in crisis. This is no good. This is not restful. Samuel Thatcher had been thrown from a carriage, and his injuries were life-threatening. Soon he would die of them. Of course, Thoreau and Horace would not stay, but before they left, Thatcher managed to pen a note recommending the wayfarers to his friend Dr. Charles L. Anderson, a local physician who lived across the river in Minneapolis. Minneapolis. From a room in the Tremont house overlooking the river, Henry wrote Sophia of their relatives' plight, while Horace wrote his mother another reassuring letter. For 9 days they explored the area around St. Anthony. Horace, the budding naturalist, bought a 5-gallon keg at the local drugstore that he filled with alcohol and which the obliging owner allowed him to keep in the store. So each day Horace would deposit into it whatever he had shot. When it was full, he'd seal it up and ship it home for dissection and study. Clearly, Horace went to work with his gun, blasting away at birds and small animals, while Henry, who had long ago put his gun away, nosed around, collecting plants and observing prairie birds. He must have explained his philosophy to Horace, for over the course of their weeks together, the young man began to shoot less and botanize more. Do you think you should shoot less and botanize more? If you want to reverse the irreversibility of global warming. In fact, at Harvard, Horace Mann would grow into the era's most promising young botanist, the very man Asher Gray himself picked to be his successor. Thoreau had made another convert. On Tuesday, they looked up Dr. Anderson, who happened to be the Minnesota State geologist. The moment he read Thrasher's note, he invited him home to dinner, and that afternoon he drove them out in his buggy to see Lake Calhoun. I used to live near Lake Calhoun, Minnesota, Minneapolis. The next day, he drove them down to Minnehaha Falls, the name made famous by Longfellow's Hiawatha. I didn't know that. I thought I knew everything, but it turns out I don't know hardly anything. By which Thoreau noted testily was entirely fictitious. Then out to Fort Snelling, whence 300 men had just left for the Civil War. Anderson was a generous host. Later he drove them into the great woods to the northwest and opened his library to them as well, so when the weather turned cold and wet, Henry would curl up by the fireside with copies of the Transactions of the Wisconsin State Agricultural Society or the Annals of the Minnesota Historical Society. He took pages of notes. When the last bison was seen in Wisconsin, 1832, and the last beaver, 1819, the Indians' Culture of Wild Rice, the best books to follow up for further studies. For Thoreau is still thinking ahead. Here, in the western prairie, was a fascinating new landscape, a whole new laboratory to test his ideas. Every plant he listed was a fresh bundle of relations, facts that keyed to a changed landscape of flowers and seeds, new sweets of animals, great histories of native land uses, settlement, destruction, regeneration. Thoreau was particularly curious about the distinctive oak openings. Clusters of oaks kept open by fire, such that the scattered trees could each develop full and rounded crowns. The University of Minnesota, he found, was set in the midst of such an oak opening, which looked strangely artificial. Did he think back to Inch's woods and the Indians' use of fire to keep the forest open? He roamed in rested, studied, and took notes. Working intensely, filling his field notebook Laying a foundation for future work, it was his usual method. Dense elliptical jottings in the field for expansion into his journal, revision into lectures, essays, books. This was meant to be the start of a new chapter on the West. Goes west. So Thoreau goes west. Old man go west. Lake Calhoun, 4 miles southwest of Minneapolis, proved too enticing to merely visit. I used to bicycle around Lake Calhoun. There's a lot of lakes. Of course, there's 10,000 lakes in Minnesota, Minnesota. On June 5th, they rode to the lakefront boarding house, run by one of the region's first settlers, the widowed Mrs. Hamilton, and for 9 idyllic days at the edge of the prairie they ate fish, went swimming, and explored, when Thoreau ran into some local lumberers. He was full of questions. Minnesota was nothing, they told him, compared to the Penobscot. And here Thoreau finally found the wild crab apple. The Hamiltons had tried to transplant a few trees, but they were tricky to manage and had not survived. Neither had those planted by their horticulturalist neighbor, Jonathan Grimes. But Grimes led Thoreau towards a few living trees in his pasture, and finally Thoreau had the pleasure of finding the wild apple for himself and securing a, quote, a lingering corymba of flowers for my herbarium. But something broke into this idyll. Thoreau had planned to stay for a couple of months, but after 3 weeks he was ready to leave. Did his health defeat his hopes for recovery? Were their funds running low? Perhaps it was the news from the war front. The first major embattlement, the Battle of Big Bethel on June 10th, flooded the newspapers with alarming reports of Union incompetence and Confederate victory. The first clear signal that this would be no brief skirmish, but a long, bloody campaign. Northern troops were dying, and Confederate forces were advancing. Thoreau had tried to avoid the war, but at Lake Calhoun his closest contacts, Dr. Emerson and Jonathan Grimes, were both Virginians. God, that's wild. Talk of the war infected everything. It's like global infection. Our faces are already set for home, he wrote in a letter to Sanborn. He wants to go home. But first there was an opportunity Thoreau could not resist. The newspaper announced a special excursion, only $10 round trip. Wow. You going to Boundary Waters? For a 200-mile riverboat journey up the Minnesota River to the lower Sioux agency in Redwood, where 5,000 Indians had gathered to receive the government's annual annuity payments promised by treaty to the Sioux, known today as the Dakota. He's going to see his Indians, Sioux Indians, in exchange for the second southern half of what, since 1858 was the new state of Minnesota, would be the perfect climax. On Friday, June 14th, they returned to St. Anthony so Horace could ship home his keg full of critters. Then moved to St. Paul for the weekend. On Monday, they boarded the side-wheeled steamboat Frank Steele, named Thoreau noted after the first white man who flashed his axe in the unbroken wilderness. That afternoon, they embarked on the grand pleasure excursion to the Sioux Agency, up the meandering Minnesota or sky-tinted river. They're going to see the Indians. It was late in the season, and the water was low, making for a slow trip as the boat ran aground and backed astern to swing around tight, winding turns. There was lots of time to watch the shore slide past, so close they could reach out a hand and sample the plant life. On board, 100 boisterous partygoers tripped to the tunes of 2 different German dance bands. Also on board were 25 soldiers bound for Fort Ridgely to train for the Civil War. I don't want to go fight. I guess I'm not a very good person. Train for the Civil War, Minnesota. Governor Alexander Ramsey and his wife, the new Indian agent, Thomas Galbraith, a few other officials, and by coincidence, Joseph May, a cousin of the Alcotts and a Harvard classmate of Sanborn's. About half the people they met in Minnesota, Thoreau calculated, had come there from Massachusetts. Henry and Horace had a stateroom, giving them some privacy against the crowds that piled aboard and slept on chairs, decks, or sprawled over trunks. They had their own stateroom. They arrived in Red Wing 4 days later at 9 a.m. on June 20th. Henry and Horace had just enough time to walk a few miles south to overlook the Great Plains. Henry longed for more time to walk farther, far enough to see the bison herds said to be grazing 20 or 30 miles away. Instead, they turned back to witness the council meeting at 1 o'clock. The annuity payments, $100 to each chief and $20 to each brave, would not, it was announced, be made that day after all. They lied. They had no gold. There's the worthless paper, the Southern paper. That's horrible. It was announced to be made that day after that, but there were plenty of speeches. Governor Ramsey assured the Indians that the new Fort Ridgely offered no threat, only protection against the bad white men. He lied again, and Galbraith promised to look after them, quote, as a father should care for his children, unquote. Thoreau, dipping his pen in irony, noted that Dakota looked, quote, hungry, not sleek, and round-faced, unquote, like children well cared for. Their spokesman was Red Owl, a dark and sinewy Minnehaha with an intelligent face from Wabash's band, a vigorous and eloquent orator. His complaints were many and bitter: stingy payments, promised food and supplies diverted and lost, promised schools unbuilt. Altogether, they were quite dissatisfied, noted Thoreau, and probably have reason to be so, adding that the Indians, as usual, had the advantage in point of truth and earnestness, and therefore of eloquence. The speech is over. 2 beef oxen were presented, and one of them was butchered and cooked for a general feast. The dance followed. 30 men, Thoreau counted, half naked, dancing to 12 musicians. Some were blowing flutes, others struck their bows with arrows. They kept good time. Moving feet and shoulder, one or the both, and what he saw and thought of the Dakota was never made public. But another onlooker published his report in the newspaper. The Indians' dance was nothing but the rudest hoppings, with wild howls and vehement gesticulation. speculations, a pitiful, disgusting spectacle that proved these poor childish creatures could never be elevated unless such barbarism was stamped out. Hmm. 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 We read how Thoreau went to the west, up to page 488, to see the Indians. He went to meet the Sioux or Dakota Indians on the Great Plains, passing through Minneapolis and Chicago, and stopping at Lake Calhoun and a Metropolitan Hotel. Uh, while he's trying to recover, and of all places, Minnesota. Was that the recovery? Why didn't he go to the West Indies? We read about Thoreau goes west, old man.